What the Actual Fork podcast is co-hosted by two intuitive eating registered dietitians, yours truly, Sammy Previtt, owner of Fine Food Freedom, and Jenna Warner, owner of Happy Strong Healthy. We can't stand diet culture bullshit and love keeping it real. Our mission is for all humans to believe that they are made for so much more than chasing a smaller body. We are also here to share with you that food can be fun and pleasurable again. Although we are medical professionals, we are human too. We are not afraid to share our deepest, darkest secrets and how years of our lives were taken by diet culture. We started this podcast so no human has to feel alone in their journey towards food freedom. So get comfy and join us for a casual convo where you can expect to laugh, cry, learn, and grow. Welcome back to another episode of What the Actual Fork podcast. Today we had Molly Forbes on the pod. She is a journalist, campaigner, and nonprofit founder. She's the author of the book Body Happy Kids: How to Help Children and Teens Love the Skin They're In, and the founding director of the Body Happy organization, CIC, a social enterprise dedicated to promoting positive body image in children. You can also find Molly on Instagram at Molly J. Forbes, and her organization's Instagram is at bodyhappy.org.
This episode was, honestly, Sam and I always write notes and questions that we want to ask the people that we're interviewing before the episode. And we did ask most of our questions, but the more stuff that came up during this episode, just authentically in conversation, was so powerful. And this episode, yes, we talk a lot about kids and body image, but it's so much more than that. And we go over just everything from being a parent and your own relationship with your body and how to bridge that gap together and manage and kind of walk through this space with children. But it's also, and I say this a couple of times because it's also really powerful if you do not have children, if you never want to have children, or if you are around children even. We talk about the power of words and just how our words matter and how it impacts those little ears.
Yeah, it was definitely a good one. And there's so much information in here. We shared this on the episode, but I think it's good to share it in the intro too, that this is our last recording before I leave for maternity leave. So it was like such a perfect one because there was so much about like mothering and parenting in here, kind of not even planning that really though. So Molly is just absolutely freaking amazing. And she kicks off the episode in such a great way when we ask her what the actual fork moment. She took it like a different direction of like a beautiful moment that stopped her in her tracks, which I thought was so cool because we usually take it like the negative direction, which we're going to do right now. So I thought like the episode started really beautifully. So I'm excited for everybody to hear that, but let's get into our personal, what the actual fork moments. So Jenna, I'll ask you, what has been your recent what the actual fork moment this week?
It's funny because I was sitting in my car. I took a yoga class on Sunday. Today's Tuesday. So I took a yoga class on Sunday and I was early. And I was sitting in my car just like scrolling as one does. And every fucking video that I saw, I just felt the anxiety rising of like, how do people think this shit is real? And like, why does it continue to go viral? And one in particular that it upset me. It wasn't even that it stopped me in my tracks, but it upset me to the point that like the way that other people may have internalized the message that was being shared, like I needed to say something to stop it, or to stop it to whoever was going to see it. But there was a video of this woman who is healing her own chronic illness, quote unquote. And she was talking about clean versus crappy foods found at Costco. And every comparison that she made was like, the clean, quote unquote, version, heavy air quotes, was 16 times more expensive than the quote unquote crappy option. And I just found that so disappointing and frustrating that the idea of moral value and your status is tied to the foods that you're purchasing at the grocery store. And I want everybody here listening today to understand that that is factually inaccurate. Like there is zero research behind anything that she was saying. And listen, if she wants to share her preferences, that's fine. But when things are being put out there with this clean versus crappy, what's the right word? The undertones of that message can't be denied. And so for anyone that has seen that video, there's like millions of views on it. So I'm sure some of you have, please know that the foods that you choose to put in your body do not define you. And like, that's it.
Yeah. That's
shitty.
So dumb. Like it's just crazy, the shit that's out there. And it's like, sometimes I get angry even talking about it. Cause I'm like, I don't even want to bring light to it. But like you said, it's important to, because people internalize those messages. And sometimes we forget, like not everyone thinks the way we do or knows the things we know. I'll go with one that we both did, because I feel like it's like just fucking hilarious. I honestly don't even remember what he said, but I just remember seeing this video of this dude.
Come on, intro it.
With all of his like stats, like what he eats in a day, what his macros are, what he bench presses, what he weighs, what his height is. I don't know. And it was like he's like a raw vegan. And I was just, I don't even like, I mean, I couldn't stop laughing. I was like choking while I was eating my oatmeal, like responding to it. But I was more so laughing, just feeling really bad for any human being who's actively dating. I just kept picturing this guy like going on a date and like sliding like these stats across the table and being like, I haven't, ate cooked food in 4 years. And like, it's just wild what people think.
The bench press stat is so funny. I forgot about that.
Yeah, like that's just like slid in there along with his food. So I just think it comes back to like no one gives a fuck. Like nobody cares what you're eating. You're allowed to have preferences, right? Like, and I think that's something, like if there are any vegans or vegetarians listening to this, like you are allowed to have food preferences if you are a vegan or vegetarian for moral or ethical reasons. Now, if you are a vegetarian or vegan and you think that you are a better human being than other humans, like, nope, doesn't work that way. Food doesn't change our morality as humans. But of course, like if you have preferences, right? Or for animal rights purposes or whatever, like totally different conversation. But anyways, so that one, I don't even know if it's like a what the actual fork moment. It was more so just like made me laugh my ass off. Like
your reaction was so funny. I was cracking up. Like
so dumb.
Yeah,
so
it's
dumb.
Hard. So for everybody listening, just a reminder to put on your like bullshit detector goggles when you're on social media.
Specifically TikTok.
And I'm going to just hop in, and I want to wish you, on behalf of the entire What the Actual Fork family and every listener, the smoothest, easiest labor. And we cannot wait to meet this baby girl.
Thank you so much. And yes, I cannot wait. I need to order like a What the Actual Fork onesie and a Fine Food Freedom onesie. That's like, I'll randomly think about that and then I like forget. So I need to do that.
I had one, a Happy, Strong, Healthy one, and it was obviously pink, and I never put it on Noah. I don't know why, but I never put it on him. I think I still have it. I'll save it for number 2 one day.
I was going to say, no matter what, if there is a number 2, no matter what the gender, that will be so cute on them. But I think that's why I was like, I was like, oh, she's having a girl, because like, I remember seeing your logo. And so it's wild. But yes, she's going to be so blessed to be welcomed into these fun families. And on the note of having children and having babies, perfect segue into Molly's episode, because we talk about all things parenting and body image and the influence we have on the lives of children. So enjoy this episode. Welcome back to another episode of What the Actual Fork podcast. Thank you, Molly, so much for being here with us today.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're so excited to spend our afternoon and your evening with you. And we love to kind of kick off this podcast asking a question that there's unfortunately many answers to. But in the body image space, because I know we're going to talk a lot of things body image today, we would love to ask, what was the most recent or profound moment that has happened to you lately that stopped you in your tracks and made you say, what the actual fork is going on here, related to body image or anything in that realm?
Yeah. So I guess recently, I just said before we started recording that we're currently going through this big house renovation, and it's so boring. It's all I can talk about at the moment, so apologies in advance. But because of that, I have had really limited mental capacity to be thinking about meals and meal planning and what we're going to eat as a family. And I really love to cook in normal circumstances. I enjoy cooking. I quite enjoy like planning what meals we're going to have as a family, but that has all gone out of the window. And so we have been mainly existing on convenience food, going to, you know, buying those like takeaway boxes from the supermarket that we have over here, where you can get like a box of like that you just chuck it in the oven and it's like Chinese food or Indian food or whatever. Or like the other night we had a late night trip to IKEA, and by the time we got home it would have been really late, so we got McDonald's for tea that night, and it's literally just whatever we can grab, beans on toast, you know, easy, throw in the oven, put in the toaster kind of food. And I had this revelation, and I was thinking about this just, I think, as we were driving home eating McDonald's in the car, that a few years ago, that would have been an intense feeling of, it would have brought up some real feelings of shame and guilt for me, not necessarily because I felt bad about eating that kind of food myself, because I had, you know, kind of put moral judgment on that kind of food, but that I was feeding my family that kind of food. And I had this sort of revelation recently of how insidious diet culture is, and how much it had got me as a parent, that not only was I equating, you know, back then, like, oh, you're, you know, you're bad, you're so lazy, why don't you cook, you know, but also equating my own parenting so much with what I was feeding my children, when actually at the moment it is literally, we're doing that out of necessity because we're trying to make our house nice. And I mean, anytime that I'm not at my laptop or parenting my kids, like taking them to school or taking them to the park, I've got a paintbrush in my hand, and I haven't got time to like whip up a fresh meal from scratch, or even like go to the supermarket and, you know, think about like all the food that we're going to have. And I just thought, how bad is that in all the ways that we're made to feel bad as parents, and all the ways that we, particularly as women and mothers, that all the pressures that we put on ourselves, actually at the moment I am doing the best that I can in a really like difficult situation. And that, you know, I felt so happy that I wasn't at this moment in my life equating any kind of moral judgment with the food that we're eating, and I wasn't berating myself, and I wasn't feeling shame or guilt. I was just like, yeah, whatever, this is what we're eating. But that wouldn't have been the case in years gone by. And yeah, I mean, there's so much wrapped up there, isn't there? Like, you know, like parenting standards and patriarchal standards that we have to live up to as women and mothers, and the emotional, like mental burden of thinking about food. And that's, you know, before we've even got into kind of anti-fat bias and weight stigma and diet culture. Like, it was a very profound McDonald's moment. So I was eating my Big Mac and fries.
That there's so much that Sam and I are going to follow up with about this, because that was so profound and amazing. So thank you for sharing that, and congratulations to you for your growth. I mean, I think that's really important for us to say, because I think we can both relate to that in different ways. And the example that you just gave, I know so many others can relate to. But before we dive deep into more things about these diet culture topics, we would love to hear more about you and your history and connection to diet culture, about your book that we haven't introduced yet, and the passion behind it, and really what brought you to a space to write it and, share this information with the world.
Yeah. So I'm 38. I'm a mum of two. I've got two daughters. My eldest is 11, going on 12 at the end of next month. She'll be 12, and my youngest is 7. And I have worked in this space, in this kind of body image space, for the last few years. I, like every other human being, every other person I know, has, have in the past been wrapped up in diet culture and been, back in my late teens, early 20s, right throughout kind of my early years as a mum, on and off diets, very much equated health with, it was all about nutrition, it was all about movement. It was all about this idea that you can tell how healthy someone is just by looking at them. And although I kind of got wise to the fact that diets weren't really the one, and they were kind of old hat, I think even when I told myself I wasn't dieting, I told myself it was quote unquote like a lifestyle change or like healthy living or whatever. It absolutely was about intense restriction. And looking back, it was often at points in my life when I felt a little bit out of control. So I was looking to kind of seek some control elsewhere or gain some sense of self-worth through trying to manipulate my body shape and have control over what I was eating and how I was moving my body. So like, I guess the most recent time, and this was kind of the last time and my sort of light bulb moment, was when my youngest daughter was a baby and we'd moved to a new part of the UK. So we'd relocated to a new area. I'd changed jobs. I'd previously worked as a radio presenter and a freelance journalist in a real buzzy kind of media environment. And then we moved to the countryside, to the other side of the UK. And suddenly everything had changed and I was a new mum again. I had a new baby. We were like, I was doing the school run and it's like tractors and chickens everywhere. It was just totally different. And what I tried to do was try and regain some feeling of control and boost my feelings of kind of wanting to be, I guess, wanting to feel seen really in the way that I had before, by trying to kind of, get my pre-baby body back, whatever that means. It was almost like if I can get my pre-baby body back, I could get my pre-baby life back. And I think I absolutely didn't realize that at the time, but I think with hindsight and a little bit of therapy, I realize now that that's what I was trying to do. But I also realized that I didn't want that for my daughters. So when my eldest daughter asked me, why I wasn't eating the same meal that everyone else was eating. I think I wrote about this in my book. She asked me literally like why I was weighing spinach. And I didn't have a rational answer, or didn't have an answer that I felt comfortable giving to her. So in that moment, that was sort of where I realized, what am I doing? This isn't healthy. This isn't good. I'm not happy. I'm miserable all the time. There's got to be another way. And then I started really, going on a bit of a mission and learning about all the amazing, things that I just had, very luckily, because I'm a straight size white woman, I had been completely not aware of, I hadn't experienced firsthand weight stigma. I'd probably witnessed it in ways without having realized it, but I hadn't experienced that discrimination firsthand. And I'm a liberal person, and I think it really shocked and surprised, and I felt a certain amount of shame when I started learning about it, that I hadn't been aware of how pervasive this issue is. And then I started campaigning around, I started interviewing, because I was a journalist, I started interviewing people and using my kind of platform that I'd built up blogging and writing about parenting to then start writing about this issue and interviewing people. And I was picked to be a co-host on, there were eight of us, and we were hosts on a TV show came out in the UK in 2019, and that was all around body image. And then I started campaigning around the way that diet products and diet brands were allowed to market around schools and children's clubs in the UK, because I was really shocked that there weren't tighter regulations. And that sort of led to what I'm doing today, which is I run a nonprofit called the Body Happy Organisation, and I wrote a book called Body Happy Kids: How to Help Children and Teens Love the Skin They're In. And that was all it's all kind of organically, that experience has organically brought me to where we are today, where we're doing, workshops with people that work with kids, and going into schools and doing workshops with kids, and still writing about this issue, and just wanting to be part of changing the culture, very much working alongside other amazing people who are doing amazing work in this space as well.
You are doing such amazing work and so many cool things too. There's so many things I want to ask you about. But one thing I thought that was so profound that you shared, and it sounds like it was a really pivotal moment in your story, is when your daughter asked you why you were weighing spinach, and you're like, I didn't even have an answer I wanted to give her. And I think so many parents can relate. I know Jenna and I, as dietitians and intuitive eating counselors, we get so many DMs from parents that start to recognize how entrenched they are in diet culture. They have children. They don't want to pass on the diet culture trauma through the generations. So I would love to ask you, and I know this, totally comes back to your book, for any parents that are listening who are recognizing that their relationship with food and body is struggling, right? They have this negative relationship with their own body, but they want to raise body happy kids. Where should they start, or what tips do you have for them?
It's so overwhelming, isn't it? And I think that I'm always really hesitant when people ask me this, to sort of, there's no one size fits all approach to this subject, and everyone's roots will be different. And for me, my route into it was learning about appearance ideals and diet culture, and reading books like Naomi Wolf's The Beauty Myth, and really learning about, thinking about it from a kind of feminist lens, because that's where my own kind of learning and degrees and stuff had that's kind of where my route into it was. I wish now that actually I had really come at it from a much more obvious place of looking at it through a fat positive lens, and coming at it from a place of really understanding what weight stigma was and anti-fat bias, because all of these subjects are, all of these issues are so interconnected. And I think that it took me too long to get there, to get to the point where I was starting to prioritize those subjects. So I think that the first thing is, I think that don't be overwhelmed by the amount of information and resources out there, because there is a lot of information and resources, and go at your own pace, and give yourself some grace, because there is, we're living in this culture, and it is so pervasive, and it's insidious, and it's everywhere, and it's all around us. So try and just give yourself a bit of a break, and and accept that it's not an overnight job to unlearn this stuff. But do start getting curious and inquisitive, and thinking about where some of your own thoughts about what makes a person healthy, where have they come from, who shaped that, how have your own experiences shaped the decisions that you're making around the food that you're feeding your family, for example. I think that I sort of thought about these ideas in the beginning as this outside concept, and I didn't do very much internal examination. And actually while it is a systemic issue and it's a cultural issue, we're all people and we're all part of this system and we're all part of this culture. And it took me a while to connect the dots, I think. But one thing I would say is that you don't have to have, I mean, I feel this really strongly, you don't have to have your own relationship with your body all figured out in order to raise body happy children. You can raise children who are at peace and friends and content in their body without being at a place where you're experiencing that contentment yourself necessarily. I think the most obvious thing is don't voice your own body dissatisfaction necessarily in front of your children. So don't body shame yourself, don't body shame other people, don't talk about bodies in a way, in a negative way, you know, really promote this message with your kids that all bodies are good bodies. And really, if you find that a difficult statement, then that is probably indicative that you're holding some anti-fat bias that you can really start to examine. And I think that just kind of really being mindful of the way that we speak about bodies and the way that we speak about health and the way that we speak about movement and food in just a really neutral way, and thinking about health in a really holistic way can be really beneficial for the way that you are raising your kids in terms of their own relationships with their bodies.
Thank you for that. Sorry, I couldn't unmute fast enough. And this question is not on our question list that Sam and I share, but it just came to me as I was thinking. I have a son who's 16 months old, and at each doctor's appointment, and I don't know when this stops, so this could be like null and void, but at each doctor's appointment, like one of the first things the doctor or the nurse shares with me, I mean, he's too young to understand now, is like his statistics, right? Like where he is on the growth chart. I don't know when that ends or if it's the same by you, but do you think that conversation that like, which has been ingrained in us, like raising children since they were born, like literally when they're born, it's the first statistic that they tell you about your child is their weight, their height, their length, and their head circumference, and what those percentages are compared to the national averages. Like, do you think there's a connection to these conversations in the healthcare system to the body image growth for our children?
That's such a good question and a really good point, I think, because I think that comes back to what we were talking about right at the beginning in terms of the pressures that particularly mothers and women are put under. It's a really emotive thing how we feed our children right from the early days when they're babies, you know, and we can often place a huge amount of shame around the way that we feed our kids, and it can be a really divisive subject. And it's almost like, I remember back, you know, when my children were babies and they were being weighed, and you'd get a well done if they put on weight, and they were following where they should be following on the growth chart, and you'd get a pat on the back and you'd go off thinking like, I'm doing a good job. And I was breastfeeding, and I remember the midwife or the health visitor, we have over here in the UK health visitors, and I remember her saying to me, that's all you, you're doing a good job, that's all you. And I remember feeling so virtuous, you know, and so pleased with myself. And, you know, I'm not saying that that wasn't deserved, because I was, you know, I was, you know, getting up at all hours and looking after my baby, but actually, in whatever circumstances I'd been looking after my child, I would have been doing a good job. And if my child hadn't have been following the line that she should or should not have been following, you know, this supposed magic line, I still would have been doing a good job, and I should have still been feeling proud and virtuous, and however I was feeding my baby. And I think that right in those early days, like as a parent, you know that your job is to keep your child safe, warm, you know, fed, loved, and those are like the most basic things. And so we start attaching moral judgment to the issue of feeding right from before they're even born. You know, we're making these decisions before we even have our children and before they're even in the world. And I think that absolutely, for me, my own personal experience when my children were babies, and I'm being really clear about this was my experience because everyone's experience is so different, but I ended up breastfeeding both of my children, and I'd made the decision that I wanted to breastfeed, and I was lucky in many ways because I didn't face many issues with breastfeeding. And I had relatively straightforward labors and everything was kind of fine in that sense. And then I made the decision to do baby-led weaning when they started going through weaning. So I had always had to trust that they go by their hunger and fullness cues because I couldn't physically see how much milk they were getting from my breast. You know, I had no way to measure. And I was, you know, feeding them with response to when they were crying, when they were hungry. There was no schedule for me. That was just how I did it. And with baby-led weaning as well, you can't really get a sense of how much they're eating. And it's sort of a really gradual thing. So I was really going by their cues. And the thing that I used to find difficult was if we would be out and about with other people, or I would have these doctor's appointments, or older relatives would say, well, how much is she getting? Is she getting enough? Is she eating enough? You know, oh, she should eat some more of that, or should you, you know, feed her, maybe drop the milk feeds. And, you know, it was this kind of outside interference. And I felt really strongly as a mum that my baby knew, both of my babies knew what they needed. And I know that isn't the case for everyone, but for me, that was the case. And it worked for us. But what I found hard was the other outside kind of comments around that. And actually that is still the case now, because I know that the way that I approach food with my kids is still at odds with how many people do it. and that's still something I have to have quite clear boundaries about, and often, you know, tricky conversations sometimes with the other people who are involved in my kids' care.
Can I just say really quick, I don't think that Molly knows this, but this is my last day of work and then I go on maternity leave. And my baby is due like any moment, my baby girl. So that was just like such a beautiful thing to hear from you. And Jenna and I were like nodding our heads the entire time. And I definitely want to pass the mic to Jenna, because Jenna, anything you want to share? I know, obviously I know more about your feeding with Noah, but I don't know if you know how much your message just meant to Jenna as well. But just her experience with Noah. So it's just like such a beautiful moment right now.
I mean, Sam nailed it, but I think it's interesting everything that you said, I had an opposite experience with. Like my child, we were joking, like my cousin's baby's 3 months old and she's like 15 pounds. And I was like, at 3 months, I'm pretty sure Noah was like still at birth weight. Like he just would not gain weight. And I had done so much work on myself prior to pregnancy of like staying away from the scale and like, you know, healing my relationship with food, body, and self. And my parents and my husband actually took away the baby scale from me because I was weighing him before and after every feed because he wasn't gaining weight. So I had this exact opposite experience that you mentioned, and I pray to God Sam has your experience because it sounds so much nicer. But for me, you know, I get that anxiety about his growth, or I did a lot more about his growth when I would go to the doctor's office. And I started to think as you were talking, like, you know, he has caught up, and like you said, like he eats when he's hungry, and I fully trust his cues. But as parents, like that obsession and that anxiety, I can see how that can be passed onto the kids when they can start to really comprehend what those conversations mean. And it's kind of given me this like whole insight from this conversation of how to approach that when he gets older and when we go to the doctor, because I'm sure that can be really tricky. So your insight was just so helpful. Thank you.
It's such an emotive thing, isn't it? It is. And well done for 16 months. Like, gosh, yeah, it's the first bit. I mean, my issue was sleep. I had my second daughter wouldn't sleep, and that was always linked with food. And I remember people saying, oh, give her a top-up feed, that will make her sleep. And have you tried this? And have you tried that? And it's because she's not getting enough milk. And I just remember like just wanting to shut myself away sometimes and just have no one tell me anything. I just didn't want everyone else's opinions. And the
But
internet didn't always help either.
I love that parallel that you're talking about, though, of like parenthood or parenting culture and diet culture, right? Because when we look at diet culture, it's placing that external emphasis and like trusting the rules or other people or the calories or the macros or the diet or the meal plan. And then the same thing with parenting, right? All of the elder generations are like, this is what you need to do. This is what's best for your baby. But coming back to trusting that motherly instinct that like, you know what's best for your child.
Yeah.
And I love, so much of today's message has been about like giving yourself grace. You're not going to have it figured out overnight. Like this is a journey. And so I think there's so many parallels with motherhood and diet culture, as well, and figuring out those relationships. So I'm very, very grateful for this conversation from both of you mamas today, because I think it's a much needed conversation.
And I'm so excited for you, Sam. Like, this is a big day. We get to share it with you, and everybody does. But Molly, Sam and I, like we said before we pressed record, we're stalking all of your Instagrams and links. And you share so many incredible statistics. And I think our listeners specifically love to hear those. Can you share some stats about body image issues with children, like the ages that are impacting and really what you're seeing with the trends? Sorry if you just heard my husband sneeze. Wow. The trends of what you're seeing with this connection and where it's starting in kids.
Sure. So over here in the UK in 2021, the Women and Equalities Commission, which is a cross-parliamentary group, they released a huge report here in the UK into body image. And they did a lot of research and interviewed a lot of experts. And there were lots of stats and recommendations that were brought up as part of that report. A lot of the recommendations, sadly, were just completely disregarded by the government over here. And their recommendations included things like urgently assessing the program that we have here in England called the National Child Measurement Program, which sees children getting weighed in school when they are in reception, which is when they first start school, when they're like 4 and 5, and then again when they're in year 6, which is when they are 10 and 11. And so one of their reasons for urgently wanting that to be assessed is because their research found that 66% of children in the UK feel bad about their body most of the time, which is a really shocking statistic that I found that really shocking. When I was researching my book, I remember really wanting to dispel this myth that body image disruption is just something that teens or tweens experience. It's not just something that children experience when they're going through puberty and their bodies are changing, or when they start using social media, because that is often what I hear from older generations is, oh, we didn't have this in my day. It's all because of social media. It's because they're looking at filters on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. And actually the research shows that children can feel bad about their bodies and display anti-fat bias as young as age 3. And there was a study that was done that found that they interviewed a whole load of nursery workers, again in the UK, and lots of the nursery workers and people in early years education recorded conversations that they'd overheard from little toddlers as young as 3 years old, talking about fat in a negative way, body shaming other children, body shaming themselves, saying that their bodies are wrong. 3-year-olds. You know, we know that 34% of 5-year-old girls are already talking about needing to go on a diet. We know that 1 in 5 girls are not raising their hand in school for fear of being judged over the way that they look. 24% of boys are not engaging in PE because they're ashamed about their bodies. These are really pervasive, important, urgent issues. This is a public health crisis. And I believe that the situation is similar in the US. I quoted a lot of studies that had also, in the US and also in Australia as well. So this isn't just a UK issue. And I personally feel, after having, you know, interviewed so many people and done so much research on this subject and run so many workshops and heard so many lived experience stories, that actually one of the things that is really contributing to this issue is that at the same time, we're seeing a parallel, we're seeing body image disruption on the rise among children, and children experiencing really, really serious, urgent issues to do with food and their bodies at a younger and younger age, and it's on the rise. So the most recent research in the UK, the most recent stats from the NHS are that the number of children being admitted with eating disorders, it had already doubled in a decade, and it's gone up again by over 40%. The number of children being diagnosed with eating disorders, children, not just teenagers, but children like preteens. But at the same time, we're also seeing a more and more aggressive approach that is just completely promoting weight stigma. So, you know, I'm not going to use the O word, but it's completely about the O word epidemic, and I'm deliberately not using that word because it's stigmatizing. But essentially, children are learning at a really young age that it's bad to be fat, that fat is bad, that you can tell how healthy someone is by being fat, that the reason that someone is fat is because they eat the quote unquote wrong food, that there are right foods to eat and wrong foods, that some food is good and some food is bad and some bodies are bad. And they're learning this right in their preschool settings, you know, and it's no wonder that we're also at the same time seeing children displaying anti-fat bias and weight stigma in the playground. And we know that kids in higher weight bodies are more likely to be bullied at school, 63% more likely to be bullied at school, according to the World Health Organization. So it is a real issue. And I think that when I speak to educators about this, we run workshops at Body Happy Org. That's like one of the things that we do. And often when we're talking to people, we're talking to the people who they've never even heard of the term diet culture. So they don't know what weight stigma is. They are just coming from the point where maybe they even went, you know, maybe they're on a diet right now. So they're coming to it completely right at the beginning. And when you kind of present them with some of this evidence and you then show them like, where are some of these messages coming from? And you sort of lay it all out. Often people end the session, you know, quite shocked and almost like, whoa, almost wishing that they didn't know it, because it is like lifting the lid off Pandora's box, you know, and once you take the lid off, you can't put it back on, unfortunately.
That is such a good analogy there. And I feel like that's what happens with dietitians with intuitive eating. We're like all causing harm and putting people on restrictive diets. And then we learned about intuitive eating and anti-diet and weight stigma. And then it's like, oh shit, we can't go back. Like there's no turning back. It takes a lot of unlearning, a lot of time. But I think this comes back. First of all, thank you for sharing all of those stats. And I know like we're going to share and link all of your Instagram accounts and website, which I know has a lot more research and those stats listed for those who, you know, maybe didn't realize how much of an issue this is. And are feeling a little bit of that overwhelm and like, maybe I should just shove this box like back under the bed. Like maybe I'm not even going to open it. What would be like your one message you want people to walk away from this episode with, of, you know, if they don't remember anything else, where they can start, what they can do, and to walk away with a little bit of hope and feeling like, okay, I can take this baby step.
Well, think about the influence that you have on your kid's life. You're the most important person in their life, and you can't, unfortunately, shield them from these messages because they're going to come for them at some point. So if you haven't done any of this unlearning yet, or you've been putting it off, like now is a really great time to do it, because you're in such a privileged, honored situation where you get to really be, you know, the most important person in this little person's life. And really, it could also really benefit you as well. And I just think the freedom that comes with not having to you know, engage in this kind of oppressive culture it can be incredibly freeing on an individual level. But also the way I look at it as a parent is, I'm really lucky in the sense that neither of my kids yet, and I say yet because it could still happen, have ever expressed feeling bad about their body. So I guess they're in the minority stats at the moment of not yet having, expressed any body dissatisfaction. But that doesn't mean that I don't need to worry about this subject, because for me, it's not just about raising children who are friends with their own bodies. It's about raising children who treat other people with bodies that don't look or function like their own with respect and dignity, and being kind to other kids in the playground, regardless of what they look like or how their bodies function. And actually not just being kind, but advocating for those kids as well. So, stepping in if they are aware that a child's being bullied, or they see weight stigma firsthand, or any kind of body-based oppression or bullying. And so I think that just this one, I said it earlier, all bodies are good bodies, and it's an affirmation that I regularly kind of use with my kids. And I think that is it sounds like such an easy statement, but it's quite a difficult one because there are so many messages telling us otherwise. But I think coming back to that, all bodies are good bodies, all bodies are good bodies, all bodies are worthy bodies, and really interrogating that and thinking about that, and thinking about how you can bring that into how you parent. So whether it's learning about thinking about ways about how you're going to feed your children, taking the restriction away, thinking about how we talk about bodies, like I said earlier. All of these things come back to that statement, all bodies are good bodies. There are no bad bodies. Our bodies work so hard for us, and our kids' bodies are amazing. And I think just allowing them to know that every single day, either through talking about how amazing our bodies are, what have our bodies done for us today, and then also doing the more serious stuff like pointing out when those bad body messages are coming and having a chat with our kids about it in an age appropriate way. Never too early to start talking, building those critical thinking skills and media literacy skills. Kids watch Peppa Pig right from the age of 2, and there is a lot of body shaming on Peppa Pig. So like pointing out, how might Daddy Pig feel when Peppa Pig is talking about his tummy in that way? Why do you think that they've put that? How might that make someone else feel? You can have those conversations with really little kids, and it goes a long way. So it's never too early to start. It's never too late to start. And I think also giving yourself a break, knowing that all you can do is the best that you can do. We're not going to have this stuff figured out overnight, but just keep trying because it is important.
There's an episode of Coco Melon that apparently it's an old nursery rhyme that I just have never heard before. And it's all about like hiding your eating sweets. And I heard the babysitter was watching with my son a couple weeks ago, and that episode came on, and I heard her say, "Ooh, mommy doesn't like this episode," and went right past it. And I was like, yay. Like, at least it's getting into somebody's brain, right? But you have shared just so much today. And I think I can speak for both Sam and I when I say that we could talk to you forever about this topic. I have so many other things I want to add, but I know it's late over there. So let's leave our listeners with like this cliffhanger and let them know where they can find more about you and your work. And I don't think we've actually even said the name of your book. So can you share that too, so that people can find you?
So my book is called Body Happy Kids: How to Help Children and Teens Love the Skin They're In. And it's not been published in the US, but you can get it on places like Book Depository. I think you get Book Depository, and they offer like worldwide shipping. But also I run a non-profit called the Body Happy Organization, and I'd say that at least 50% of our orders, so we sell books, including my own book, and we sell we've got like an affirmation card game that we designed called they're called Pocket Boosters, and they're a really cute, great little resource that you can use with kids. And we also sell lesson plans. So we sell lots of teaching resources, and we do CPD workshops with teachers, educators, youth workers, also foster carers, anyone who works with children. And we've just recently started doing student sessions as well, where we go into schools, but also we've done some virtual sessions. I've got a meeting with a school who want me to do one in Italy. So it's possible that we've had inquiries from people in the US who are interested in it's not just me, there's a whole team of us. Yeah, you can order my book through, I guess is a long-winded way of saying, you can order my book directly from the Body Happy organization, bodyhappyorg.com, if you can't get it in your library or bookshop, local bookshop in the US. And yeah, the nonprofit I run is called the Body Happy Organization, CIC, Body Happy Org for short, and our website is bodyhappyorg.com. And we're on Instagram, and I'm on Instagram, all the usual regular places.
Awesome. And people can find you on Instagram at bodyhappyorg and Molly J. Forbes. So thank you so much, Molly, for all of the knowledge bombs that you dropped today. We're so grateful for this conversation.
Thank you. It was really nice, and good luck. Good luck. I feel honored to have been part of your last day at work.
Thank you.
Guys, thank you so much for listening to another episode of What the Actual Fork Pod. We know there are a lot of pods out there, and we are so grateful that you are here listening with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, like, share with all your friends and faves, and follow along with us on social at What the Actual Fork Pod. We promise to continue to bring you the hottest topics, greatest guests, and the most fun you can possibly have while fighting diet culture bullshit. We love you, we appreciate you, and we will see you next week for a lot more fun.